Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of FilmFellas. Today we're going to talk about Mad Max 2, which is a real long-standing personal favourite of mine, but not kind of steal his thunder by any way. I've got a guest who's going to talk to me about this, who reached out to me on Twitter, who's also a big fan of this movie. Take it away, dude. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Nick Bartlett. I'm a film reviewer and features writer for a few publications. I write for Critical Popcorn and Slash Film, and I've just submitted an article about for Horrified magazine. They're doing a series on Amicus films, and I submitted one about From Beyond the Grave. So hopefully that'll be out soon.
Yeah, I'll look forward to reading it. And what sort of kind of things do you do for Slash Film?
Mainly, I'm a features writer, so
Right.
it'd be like all the ranked lists that you get. Yeah, the latest one I did was on, well, the best, the reason, 10 reasons that Raiders of the Lost Ark is still the best Indiana Jones film, which seems like a sort of stating the obvious, but it feels like there's been a sort of pushback against that recently. A lot of people saying Temple of Doom or Last Crusade's their favorite, and I'm like,
Yeah, you see, not to make this into an Indiana Jones episode, but I'm with you. I absolutely adore Raiders.
yeah,
We did our top 5 action movies, and I fought tooth and nail for Raiders to be in there because, for me, Raiders has so many iconic action scenes.
yeah,
And I get that people argue about, okay, you could take him out of it and blah blah blah, and the film was stuff there. It's interestingly, a couple of the guys rate Last Crusade above it, and I really rate Last Crusade, but I just think Raiders has such a huge part in my growing up that it's really imprinted on me. So that's why I
yeah.
love Raiders, and that's why I love Mad Max too. I mean, you and I will get into the guts of Mad Max 2 and Fury Road a little bit later, but talk to me about how you came across Mad Max, because you're considerably younger than me. I'm 49, I'm knocking on 50. So, how did you come across it?
Well, well, when I was younger, like at my parents' house, my room was like at the bottom of the house because when they made room for my brothers and sisters, I sort of got shunted to the garage basically, and I just basically spent my evenings watching films that I was probably too young to watch, and so I think I saw it at like probably on channel 5 or something really late at night. Just sort of was watching. I saw so many films that way. I saw like The Thing and Aliens, and like lots of bad films as well, but like that was just one of the ones that was on, and like I think I must have tuned in just as the final chase was starting, and I was just like, this is incredible. I was sort of just really drawn in by just, it didn't feel like it's sort of like a seminal chase, but it's also completely different to like pretty much any other chase scene that I've seen. So like I was just really drawn in. And then obviously I was like, well, what is this? It's Mad Max. Well, better go watch the first one. And
Yeah.
the first one is like nothing like.
Yeah, I mean, and it is, isn't it? It's one of those rare occurrences where you've got a sequel that you probably don't need to go and watch the original, the first one, because the prologue does such a great thing of setting it up. I mean, like you, I think I came across it in passing originally. I mean, I think you and I had a little bit of a chat about Alex Cox and Repo Man, and I grew up on Movie Drone and things like that, and I think I probably caught it on late night TV one night. I used to have a TV at the bottom of my bed, so when my parents had gone to bed, as soon as like I leave it half an hour and then hear my dad snoring, and then Foot used to come out of the bottom of the bed and turn my TV on, and I'd had like a really long headphone cable, so I used to watch movies right up until the early hours, and proper wasted youth like that, but largely thanks to Alex Cox. And I think I discovered Mad Max 2 that way, and like yourself, I think the standout is the 20-minute 30-minute chase sequence that finishes the film, but actually there's so much more going on that is actually very, very influential in the movie, that has gone on. So, rather than me hog it about the plot, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of a brief synopsis about the hell is this movie about? What's going on in it?
Well, it's very simple, isn't it? It's like in the future, society's broken down, and it just seems like everyone is hunting for gasoline. Basically,
Mm.
there's one little outpost of where they've managed to I don't know, seas.
Refined, yeah, it's like
Yeah,
refining oil, aren't they? Yeah,
yeah,
it's like a refinery.
and it's
Yeah.
almost like I mean, it is like a western. It's like they're sort of it's drawn a group of marauders who are all after, who are all trying to get hold of
Mm,
the gasoline, and into that scenario comes like Max, who's like a
mm.
loner. He's very much like a western hero. He just turns up in his I can't intercept.
It's the the V8. It's
Yeah,
funny, isn't it? Because you're right. The Western thing I always think is really funny. Like when people actually just really classify it and say, "Oh, it's this post-apocalyptic movie," and therefore sometimes they're immediately put off. I don't do post-apocalyptic, it's all really down. But actually, it's not. It's a Western.
yeah, yeah,
It's the man with no name comes to town and rescues the town from essentially a group of marauding outsiders, which is almost like the stock of various Clint Eastwood spaghetti western movies and various other kind of movies. There's no real difference.
yeah, exactly. It's interesting we were talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark at the start, because I feel like the big truck scene in that and the final scene in Mad Max are both sort of feel like very similar to like that's the chasing like Stagecoach.
Mm.
Like that stuntman, Yakima Canutt would just be like doing everything, jumping from the horse to horse, jumping over.
Yeah,
It was like very sort of inspired by that.
and it's interesting because one of the things that Mad Max did was kind of kickstart that whole genre of post-apocalyptic. I mean, it was around before then. I always remember there's a film that I actually saw on Moviedrome with an early film with Don Johnson in. I think it's called A Boy and His Dog, and it's a very early like post-apocalyptic thing with a not very kind of female friendly ending, because he kills his girlfriend to save his dog and feed his dog at the end. But there was this kind of, because of the Cold War and the 70s and the things that were kind of going on, and the CND movement, you did have quite a lot of post-apocalyptic kind of things happening in the 70s, probably largely because, like Westerns, they were probably really cheap to make. I mean, you essentially didn't need new props, did you? You basically go and find the most messed up props that you could buy, and and get the weirdest people that you could find, and do it out in the middle of nowhere. So there was I mean, that is ultimately what they did with Mad Max. It was pretty much not much of a script, and just did loads of chase sequences and then filled in the story. And so I always think that post-apocalyptic genre's got a lot. It owes a huge debt to Westerns, not just in nicking stories, but actually also in the fact that it probably started a genre of its own.
Yeah, but I also find it sort of interesting that it is like it did sort of that it's got that aesthetic is that mad that from Road Warrior is so distinct, and you
Mm,
know it's made such an impact on like like post-apocalyptic films, and yet
mm,
none of them have had any sort of cultural impact really. They're all
mm.
come and gone and have not been that good. I mean, I would say the most obvious sort of film that's been inspired by it is probably like something like Waterworld, which
Yeah,
is
and it's interesting you pick up on that straight away, because there's one shot, isn't there, in Waterworld, which is like literally frame set exactly the same as Mad Max 2, which is where the old guy, you've got Papagallo, I think he's called,
yeah,
stood on the left, and you've got the people coming towards it, and exactly the same shot in Waterworld
yeah,
with the jet skis.
smokers, yeah.
Yeah, the smokers. Yeah, and it's funny because I always went. I was one of the few people who went to see Waterworld at cinema. I actually don't think Waterworld's that bad. I'm gonna stick up for it. I actually don't think it's that bad. I enjoy it. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure, but that scene always stands out as it's clear Kevin Reynolds, who directed Waterworld, was a huge fan of Mad Max 2 as well.
Yeah,
So, and one of the things that I always loved about Mad Max 2 is it's like that simplicity of the story. You start off with Max, you meet him kind of mid. It's almost like you join him mid paragraph in a novel. It's like
yeah,
something's gone on and he's being chased, and therefore and you just join him, and he accidentally then meets the gyro captain, who then tells him about gasoline, which leads into the town, and it's a very simple kind of story, really. And Mel Gibson famously only has like 16 lines of dialogue, which is, probably up there with Tom Hardy's lines of dialogue in Fury Road.
Two of them are the same line, I think. It's like, I'm just
Are
here
they?
he says, I'm just here for the gasoline, like twice.
and it's, and that at this point he then meets the Marauders, and obviously, I always thought it was funny, if you want to kind of criticize a film, I always think it's sometimes fun to look at a film objectively. You kind of think that the people who were in the refinery, they'd have struck up a deal with the Marauders to kind of say, all right, you come back, we'll give you some gasoline now, go away for 2 weeks and let us just get on with our lives. But we've got to make the film happen. But ultimately, yeah, Max they're looking for a rig, and it so happens Max has seen a rig, and he trades fuel for going to bring them the rig, and then he runs off in his V8 Interceptor, and it gets blown up, and he ends up having to go back and beg for forgiveness and to be part of their escape plan. I mean, it's interesting. I always think with in Mad Max, one of the kind of standout characters in it is Bruce Spence, I think it is, isn't it? Oh no, it's not. Sorry, it's not Bruce Spence, is it? I can't remember. Yeah, the gyro captain is he's superb in it. And I always wondered, like, did they not think that casting him again in in Mad Max 3 would essentially just confuse people?
Strange, isn't it? It's like, it's barely a trilogy. It's so strange how, like, because in some respects, like, so in Road Warrior, Max has got a sleeve off one arm, and he's got this sort of weird like metal like splint on his leg,
Yeah,
which is a reference to how he ends up in the first film. So there is continuity, but then completely disregards something like Bruce Spence turning up in both films.
Yeah, like it's almost like he's playing the same type of character, and Bruce Spence is there, and is it his brother? Is it his cousin? Is it It's like, and it's an odd thing, but he's such a charismatic on-screen, and almost it has that Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant quality about it, where you've got Mel Gibson, who's pretty short. I think he's only like 5'6", 5'7". Bruce Spence is obviously like like me, like 6'3", 6'4" sort of thing, and they look an odd partnership on screen, but actually there's some beautiful moments that really work. My favorite one is is when they're up on the hill and the dog food, and you have the escape and the tragic kind of attack on those vehicles, and Gyro Captain pulls out his thing, and it's almost like those unintentional pieces of brevity, of kind of levity, where they probably didn't intend it to be comic, but it just is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there are a fair few funny. My favorite bit in the whole film is I really love the mechanic from the compound.
Yeah, and his little friend.
And he's like saying, "Oh, it's good." There's just the whole. It's like Chinese whispers almost. Like over one side, they're like shouting how quick the
rig. They've got, yes, the rig. How is she? Yeah. And it's like, okay, but how long is it going to take? It's like 24 hours. You've got 12. Yeah. It's like, all right.
Okay.
Like... which is probably like a little dig at every mechanic ever.
Yeah.
Every mechanic always like knowing that nobody else can do what they do.
Yeah.
And things like that.
But yeah, what we were saying about Gyro Captain, like I love, like he's probably my favorite character in the film. Well, no, I like him and the mechanic, but like the Gyro Captain especially, like I like how he's on one hand he's comic relief, but he's also like a sort of foil for Max, and that he's not a marauder, and he's also not like one of the people who's sort of hiding. He's like he's a loner like Max, and he's got his own method of surviving, which is the snakes, but he's also different from Max. He's distinct from him, and that by the end of the film, he's sort of assimilated into that group, and he's sort of taken on the leadership role in that group. And Max is still like on his own. And I enjoyed that. I enjoy this sort of parallel of like he's sort of, and when they're looking through the binoculars and the telescope at what's going on, Max is sort of still watching what happens, even when there's the woman's getting raped and everyone's getting raped. And like there's a moment where the gyro captain is looking, and then he takes the binoculars down, and he can't look anymore. And it's
Yeah,
like,
and it's in the mouth, isn't it? He's kind of got this like, it's like a half smile, but then the half smile. The thing that I really like about the gyro captain is the subtle hints at how educated and probably where his social standing was before the war. You know, there's a little thing about he carries a spoon where Max is eating with his hands. You know, he carries a spoon, and then he always has recipes, and the recipes are like fresh, like fricassee, and things like that. You know, rather than just like fried snake. You know, there's like, and then he talks about to those who said, "Oh, you need to take a look at yourself." And things like that. But then on the other hand, when you look closely at his the back of his gyrocopter, he's got naked women plastered all over the back of the thing. And it's quite funny that when he gets into the camp, one of the first things he tries to do is get laid.
Yeah. He's like, he's sort of, because he tries to leave with her, doesn't he? The girl that falls for. And there's the sort of character beat where she's like, I'm gonna stay. And
yeah.
I mean, he would just leave on his own, but he stays as well, and he's not just out for himself, which I quite enjoy.
Yeah, I think he recognizes what is the right thing to do, even though for a moment it's almost like his dick's doing the thinking.
Yeah.
The other character I really like in it is actually Vernon Wells' character, which he's and this this such kind of love. I mean, the famous story about Vernon Wells in his cut out pants was Mel Gibson would know how cold it was on set by the colour of his bum.
Yeah.
And but I also think, for a character with so few lines as well, there's a real kind of menace and screen presence on it as well. And Vernon Wells would obviously then go on to become like the bad guy for hire in Hollywood. It's like, he plays the bad guy in Commando not long after it as well. And
Inner Space as well.
Yeah. I forgot about Inner Space and his dodgy accent and things like that. So and it's funny that he had that career of these kind of quite characterful bad guys. He plays like real proper like kind of bad guys, and then one of my kind of other favorite moments in it, and I guess it's that as we find out later on, it's the narrator of the opening and the closing of the film, and it's almost like the character you least suspect to be narrating the film because they don't speak throughout the entire film, and that's the feral kid and the boomerang scene, and I think this is one of the things why I really liked Mad Max 2 and why it stood out is there are certain kind of, each scene seems to be so very well thought through and very cleverly interlinked, but actually also very iconic. And the whole thing with the metallic boomerang has always kind of stood out as one of those great iconic scenes.
Yeah, well, I've got that. That meant the image that always pops into my head when he's the boomerang is the guy trying to grab it in his fingers.
Yeah, but again, there's a lovely juxtaposition, isn't there? And I guess modern Marvel films have really harnessed this. I guess like that whole thing about seriousness with a little bit of then humor thrown in, and I think it's interesting. I always felt that Shane, who did the Lethal Weapon movies, really kind of captured that whole kind of action, terrible things happening, but then there's little moments of levity, and that whole thing of you've got Wes's lover who's kind of killed and takes it in the head and instantly, and then he throws it back, and then you see the lighter side of something like that where he jumps up and grabs it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's interesting you say that because so I always assumed that was like his lover, but it turns out that wasn't the plan. He was supposed
to. Was it
not?
No.
So I've got this book. It's really good. It's really fun. It's this cool. I don't know if you've come across that before.
No, go on, talk to me about it. What's it called? I can't make out from the cover.
Well, Born to Be Bad. And it's
right.
Like Simone Singh, and it's really interesting. It's a bunch of interviews with lots of actors who played like villains in action films. So it's called Vernon Wells. It's got who else has got it's got lots of Paul Freeman from Raiders of the Lost Ark is in there, and William Atherton from Ghostbusters, and Ronnie Cox from Total Recall and stuff like that. And yeah, he in the book he talks about how that character wasn't supposed to be his lover. There was a cut scene where he was basically essentially rescues this guy from this kid from like another area where they're killing off people, and he's going to be that protege basically. He's going to take over from him, and it's like it doesn't really matter.
No, but I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that they've gone to that length of a kind of backstory for him, and actually they're therefore showing a different side to Vernon Wells's character.
Yeah. It's sort of like, I mean, I think it doesn't matter, because in any case, you sort of see that it's sort of the impact it makes on him, and it's sort of he gets that point on. He's got a vendetta against Max and the feral kid, so it's like so it doesn't really matter what the relationship is, but it's interesting the sort of the world building that was going on before.
Yeah, massively, yeah, and I guess when you talk about that world building thing, that kind of brings us on to the Ayatollah of rock and roller himself, who essentially, if you read the kind of the kind of things online about it, was supposed to be Max's mate from the first movie.
It doesn't really.
It kind of doesn't. It's like one of those things where I kind of think because of, I think people probably read into it too much a little bit, and you don't know whether that was ever the intention or whether that's kind of been almost reverse engineered in over time. Like a little bit of fan fiction almost.
Yeah, I think it was the initial idea was that, and then obviously it sort of abandoned that halfway through or something.
Yeah,
but like I do think I think it's an example of like what Wes, like the henchman being so iconic that the Lord Humongous is as sort of, I don't know, he doesn't make as big an impact, I don't think. Like he's not really that villainous, it seems. Like he's very sort of persuasive in his language and stuff, even though like that's the bit that's talking about the plot inconsistencies, maybe.
Yeah.
The fact that he's got his men have killed people, he's got them tied to the front of trucks, and he's making these, and he sort of says like, well, if you go now, leave the gasoline, we won't touch you.
Walk away. Yeah,
people in the compound are like, he seems reasonable, and it's like, it's not that. It's like, I always thought if it was that, if it was because then they sort of leave it ambiguous, like, is he being honest or not? I don't think it's not that ambiguous to me, but like you think if he was that set on sort of convincing them, he might let the hostages go rather than just
but I guess like any great leader, if Wes was leader, he'd rule through fear, where Humongous has clearly got to that leadership stage by being ruthless, and he's quite a physical kind of thing, but there's clearly some intelligence there, and that's kind of the manipulation of just walk away, for example, shows a cleverness and a strategy. Because I agree, I think he'd say walk away, but he'd just hunt them down and get them. And then when he opens his box and there's the revolver and the to hold on to that clearly shows again more depth to the kind of character rather than just being a huge muscle guy sort of thing. And I guess when we kind of get into the actual camp itself, I always think you've highlighted the mechanic. I guess the other kind of person to highlight is it Papagallo, or and his kind of leadership, and he plays almost very much a man of reason, but the thing that always bothered me was like this whole thing about they're going to the coast and all there is to do is breathe, and it's like, well, you clearly must know there's been an apocalypse. What makes you think that this place still exists? Which is very much almost like something that crops up, and we'll move on to Fury Road in a minute, because there are some parallels between Mad Max 2 and Fury Road, because that's almost a part of Fury Road as well. The whole thing to the place.
Yeah, I guess in that respect, Mad Max 2 is actually a little bit more optimistic than Fury.
Yeah.
You don't actually see where they end up, but you hear that, like, they did get there. And it's like, so it must have existed. But like, I know it's very sort of nebulous, this idea of where exactly they're headed. But yeah, talking about the mechanic again. I just love the whole mechanism for him going about, just moving about, because obviously he's like can't use his legs, and they've got this whole crane and pulley system, and he's just sort of brilliant. I love that whole everything.
And you know, and his sad demise at the end again is kind of quite comedic, isn't it? Because of the whole thing of him dropping the petrol on his legs, and then it's on his hands, and there's that look, and again it's that, you know, those kind of those lighter moments which are then obviously tinged with sadness. And what do you think about the warrior woman? I mean, do you think that, you know, do you think Miller even considered that this could be a potential love interest for Max? Because she kind of does reach out to him.
There's a couple of moments, because everyone writes him off as like just in it for the money at the first, which you know, but like, or just in it for not for the money, for the gasoline.
For the gasoline, yeah.
And there's a moment where she sort of says like, "Oh, there's more to you than I thought." But like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really think there's much. She's not really much of a character, is it? It's like she's great. I think all the actors are great, and they're what make the characters interesting, because there's not that much on the page for any of them. But that's fine. They're all like just archetypes, aren't they? And it's like there's the quiet guy who ends up getting I feel really bad. He just gets absolutely headbutted.
Yeah, and it's quite funny, isn't it? Because you think he's just been headbutted, but then obviously you find out, you know, he's just like laying dead somewhere in a scene, and it's like well, that clearly didn't kill him. What killed him? I'm not so sure that did kill him, but
I don't know. I can't. I mean, they never explain it. I wasn't sure he was actually dead. I thought he might just be like coma, like, you know, like brain dead or something.
Yeah.
Why would he still be lying there like days later? But
yeah, anyway, true, good point. Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. What the point is, it's like there's not really. They're not really fleshing out any character. I think it's just really well cast. All the actors like do really well, bring out all the sort of humanism of the characters and stuff.
But I do think it's testament to the actress who plays the warrior woman, because when she gets it, when Wes kills her on top of the truck, you know, it's a proper like bit of a gutting moment, you know, and the music and they really do kind of play it out, the tragedy of her death and the demise of the mechanic at the same time. It's a horrible way to die as well.
I think it's really shocking, especially like I think we've been so conditioned recently with films that in sort of sequences like that, people go out in a blaze of glory, or they'll take someone with them or something. And really, they don't in this. It's just so unceremonious. They just get they're just off and then they're done. And it's like there's no slow-mo. There is that when she gets shot. There's a sort of and the music sort of swells and stuff. But she hasn't really done anything like that. Like it's really hard. It's really harsh. Like it's just like it feels really realistic. Like there's no glory. It's like they're just
and this is why I kind of, because for me, I get that people say that Fury Road isn't a remake of Mad Max 2. It's another story. But there are so many parallels between Mad Max 2 and Fury Road. So, for example, the parallels that I can think of, the rig is one, okay. The V8 Interceptor getting destroyed is another. The fact that Zoe Kravitz has the birthday machine.
Oh, does she?
Yeah. So very towards the end, just before they start getting attacked, it pans across the thing and Zoe Kravitz is playing with the birthday machine. And then obviously Rosie Huntington Whiteley's death is very kind of similar to the warrior woman's death in there as well. And to me, I kind of almost think, well, is basically Miller just redoing Mad Max 2? And when we get to, you know, because he now has the technology to realize, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the ending of Mad Max 2. The whole chase sequence is utterly amazing how they did it. And, you know, we'll come on to that and the very many broken limbs that it resulted in. And so, but I think Miller then, you know, discovered, right, I've got the technology. I can really do it. I can really show. Because there are some amazing shots in Fury Road, specifically the one with Hardy where he's on the pole and the fuel truck explodes. I mean, it's just such an iconic shot. But I do wonder whether Miller thought, right, I'm just going to basically redo Mad Max 2, but not call it that and make certain tweaks to it. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, are we going into the comparisons now? Like,
yeah, go for it. Yeah, let's go for it.
Because yes, I mean, I definitely I like it's interesting because I think in terms of just what's a better film, I think Fury Road probably is a beautiful film. It looks amazing. But yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, where like Mad Max 2 did it basically Fury Road basically does what Mad Max 2 does, but sort of what's the word, like progressed, but like makes it
it's more it's like it's kind of like it's the same, but it's like, the one thing that I do wonder, right, whether influenced J.J. Abrams on when they did The Force Awakens was basically watching Fury Road. Because I do wonder whether Abrams saying, "Oh, maybe I could just remake Star Wars, but just do it like bigger and better." And
yeah.
yeah, because it's like, because if you look at Fury Road, and if you love Mad Max 2, like I remember going to see Fury Road at the cinema. I agree with you. I walked out of Fury Road and I was like, oh my god, how the hell did they do some of those shots?
Yeah.
The whole thing of it is, and it's a very kinetic experience. This whole thing's of it, but then I was like, but has he just remade Mad Max 2 with some sort of differences?
I don't know. The argument it says I've seen is that Mad Max Fury Road is basically the last 20 minutes of Mad Max just stretched to like feature length, which because it is just a chase scene. That's basically you sort of get the sort of world building and stuff is built into and all the exposition is built into dialogue along the way, and I love that. I don't know. I think they're different. Obviously, on the superficially on the surface level, there are elements that are the same. I feel like on the whole, they're two different beasts.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree, and it's funny because I actually think Mad Max 2, because of when it came out and when it is probably the more influential film.
Yeah.
I think probably the one that people would enjoy more now is probably Fury Road, because of the production values, the wow on screen. But I do think Fury Road wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Matt. I think he clearly learned some lessons in filming Mad Max 2.
And like it sounds condescending to say it, or sounds like being sort of. But I'm not trying to belittle Mad Max 2 at all, because I absolutely like it as well. But it's like one of those things where you say for its time.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't mean that in a isn't it quaint sort of way. It is absolutely groundbreaking. But I feel like with Fury Road, it's like, well, now we can do even more. Now we can push the envelope more. And obviously, I feel like on a sort of narrative level, it's a lot more kind of conventional, which is a plus and a minus, I think. There's this YouTube channel I watch called Red Letter Media that everyone knows about, but like they did a review of Mad Max. They sort of cover this, but they say, like, Mad Max Fury Road is a beautiful film. Mad Max 2 is like sparse, it's desolate, it's barren, it's everything. It's completely appropriate for the story it's telling. I don't, it's not say one's better than the other. It's It's like an ugly film, and in the best way, it's like, this is horrible.
Well, one of the things that amazes me for Mad Max 2 at the time, we're talking, it's 1982 when it came out, and how well put together it is as a. Like literally, you watch movies from like 1980s, 81, 82, and and I always think that one of the films that Mad Max 2 was a clear influence on. It's funny because when I did the Repo Man chat, we were talking about how the 80s was very much like a mashup of genres decade. We'd gone from, it was almost like you had westerns, or you had gangster movies, you had sci-fi movies, but you never merged the two. But all of a sudden, in the 80s, you're getting people merging genres. And you had Ice Pirates, which is essentially Mad Max 2 meets Star Wars. And then you've got, Near Dark, which is a vampire and a western. And you start to kind of get this meshing up of genres. But a lot of them are so bad, and they were made for a lot more money than Mad Max 2. And I think it's testament to George Miller as a filmmaker that, he spends his money very, very wisely. It's actually a very intimate film, and it's all very, very well shot. It's very performance-led. But then when it gets to the spectacular moments, like the blowing up of the refinery, it's actually a bit of a, wow, bloody hell, they really did that. And
Yeah,
it's not a small explosion either. I mean, it literally is probably, it's almost like you could probably potentially say that it's had a huge influence on people like Chris Nolan as well for doing things more practically.
yeah. I mean, that's the other thing as well, is that the Road Warrior is obviously entirely practical. I think Fury Road got a lot of plaudits for being almost entirely practical, but there are obviously is digital bits in there as well. It's like Road Warrior is like when it just absolutely when Humongous's car gets crushed at the end, bits go everywhere. It's like that just looks like, it looks great,
and it's quite funny because when I watched it on Blu-ray, and we'll come on kind of onto the end chase sequence. So I mean the famous one is where the bike hits the car and he does the flip, and I think he broke his leg, didn't he? Did the stuntman, and and there's so many great bits in that, and you can even see with the tanker crash at the end. I've got it on Blu-ray, and you can see the guys wearing a crash helmet in it.
Right.
And it's like, and it's certain things, they really did flipping trash that tanker, and there really was a guy driving it, and it's almost like testament to the Aussie filmmakers at the time that they really committed to this. They didn't do it by halves.
There's a shot that I must have tricked myself to think it was a bit more elaborate than it actually is, but it's still my favorite shot in the film. And there's a bit where I think it's when he's bringing the rig back, or he's going out again in the Interceptor, and all the Marauders are like running to their cars. And there's a bit where the camera follows one of the bad guys as he runs to his car, and it follows him getting in the car and starting the car, and through the window you can see all the other cars.
It's such a well-timed shot, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like it's one of those shots where I kind of think that they set all, because I think they had like 3 or 4 cameras, and I think they must have planned it, and then they probably shot it 3 or 4 times. But when they saw it that evening in rushes, I bet they were giddy with themselves about that shot. I'm totally with you. That shot is so well timed, isn't it?
I mean, it's over and done with so quick. In my head, the camera pulled back again, and you sort of see the scale of it all, and it cuts immediately after that. So it must I don't know. But that's every time.
I think it jump cuts, doesn't it, between what the gyro captain sees, and things. So you get that sense of geography, which not a lot of directors really understand sometimes in action, that you've got to have that sense of where everything is. And I'm with you. It's funny because when I watched it the other day, and I watched Fury Road straight after it as well, because I knew we were going to kind of have that chat, and there are some really incredible shots for essentially what was a B movie shot in 1982.
I mean, that's the other thing. That's the other thing I heard, is that apparently the gyro captain was written into the script because George Miller wanted like helicopter shots, and the budget wouldn't stretch to it unless it was actually like essential. So he put in that the guy rides a gyro.
That's brilliant.
So that's brilliant. I love that. Yeah,
and I guess
you said it's like a B movie, but I love the fact, all the attention to detail and the sort of the storytelling elements that are in there. Because like I was just watching it like recently for this, I was like, I love the little music box. It's sort of just showing how far from like the world they are. Because like even Mel Gibson does this sort of sad little smile when he first plays it, and then that's like how he connects with the feral kid. But also like this might be a bit of a stretch, but there's the bit with the sawn off shotgun where he's sort of holding the gyro captain at gunpoint for all of it, and then you find out that he's never had any bullets in it. And then I feel like that's sort of foreshadowing for the truck later on. It's like he's been holding. He doesn't trust the gyro captain at all. So why would he tell him it's empty? And then the people in the compound, they don't trust Max. Why the hell would they trust Max? So like this whole thing at the end is like, and him and the gyro captain sort of sharing that look at the end, like, oh yeah, we've both been had, sort of thing. And like it's like really subtle, like little bits of storytelling within the sort of B movie.
And I think that whole thing about the look at the end between the gyro captain and Gibson, it's I almost think there's the two things that you pointed out there: the little birthday machine and Max's look, and then the look he gives. I think it's done to kind of let you know that Max, there is some humanity there. There's there isn't much, but there is some humanity there, and and I think that whole kind of sequence of them discovering that they don't have the gas You know, it's kind of like it's such a. I actually think it's a very good twist. So I actually didn't see it coming.
I know, but it's always sort of underplayed, isn't it? To the point where you could almost be forgiven for missing it or for thinking that, like, maybe, I don't know, that Max was in on it or wasn't in on it, and it's but maybe it's just because it's come after that amazing chase, and it's like, well, that's the end of the film now.
Yeah,
you know? Like, yeah,
I guess the other thing to kind of acknowledge, you know, in the actors, we've got to acknowledge Gibson in it, because Gibson wasn't a star by this point. You know, he'd done. You know, he'd done bit parts in movies. I mean, he wouldn't do Lethal Weapon, I think, for another 4 or 5 years or something like that.
If you watch the trailer for the original trailer for The Road Warrior, like he barely figures in it.
Right.
It's all about the action and the car crashes and the chases and stuff. It's not the focus of it at all.
Because I think, you know, around about this time, Gibson owed a lot to Peter Weir. So Peter Weir he'd done Mad Max, and he'd got a couple of and he'd done Gallipoli with Peter Weir. And then the 2 movies he did straight after Mad Max was The Year of Living Dangerously. Sorry, after Mad Max 2 was The Year of Living Dangerously, which was a bit of a big hit in America. And then he'd done The Bounty a couple of years later, again with Peter Weir. So the 2 big movies he did after Mad Max were for both Peter Weir, and I do kind of think that. And then he would go on to get Lethal Weapon. And it's interesting because, you know, there's still reports, you know, that back then Gibson was a very hard drinking, hard fighting. I mean, you can see it in him. He does look rough in some scenes, and famously when he did The Bounty, Anthony Hopkins was a recovered alcoholic, and you know, he kind of took Gibson under his wing, because apparently there were days where Gibson had, you know, gone out and got absolutely rat-arsed, got into fights, and they could only film him from one side of his face.
Oh god.
Yeah, you know, and Gibson himself testifies, you know, that Australian male, and even on the set of Mad Max 2, it's very much the Australian male. You know, there would be bonfires and parties, and in fact they would film into the night, then basically getting drunk. So a lot of the kind of the scene where Humongous is giving his speech and it's raining and the bikes are going down, apparently was shot basically while they were all on the beers.
Amazing.
So yeah, you know, so it's kind of interesting to that. What do you think? I mean, because one of the things that with Mad Max now, I always think it's interesting that Britain's got James Bond. You know, America have got Ethan Hunt and Indiana Jones. Really, Australia's only real franchise characters are Crocodile Dundee and Mad Max, and I always feel like Mad Max has been shot. I mean, there are rumours that The Wasteland is gonna hit cameras, and I almost wondered whether George Miller would then use it as an opportunity to redo some scenes from Thunderdome, most notoriously the Thunderdome scene, 2 men enter, 1 man leave. And I did wonder, I mean, what do you think? Do you think we will get any more Mad Max movies? Do you think Gibson might have a part to play? I mean, you know, in the same way that Logan did, you know, Old Man Logan, could we end up with an Old Man Max type movie?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like if they were going to bring Mel Gibson back, they probably would have done it with Fury Road.
Right.
I'm not 100% on top of like where the controversy fell in terms of that. So it might have been a bit too hot for him to come back then. I mean, I've heard the next one's they're making a Furiosa film now.
Yeah, Furiosa is the one that I've heard, but also I understand they've written a Mad Max and the Wasteland, which is apparently it's going to be set a year before Fury Road.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, that sounds amazing. I'll be there.
Yeah.
I don't really know about Mel Gibson. I don't really. Yeah. I mean, I've not really seen.
He's a controversial character, isn't it? And I always think it's funny because Robert Downey Jr. was somebody who Mel Gibson supported. You know, I don't know if you know the history of it, but you know, Downey Jr. was on an upward trajectory. He'd done Chaplin, but then he got heavily involved into drugs and was basically unbankable. He was uninsurable as an actor, and basically Gibson paid his insurance for several movies. They'd done Air America together, and Gibson had paid for basically Robert Downey Jr. to do The Singing Detective and various other things. And so I think they've had a close relationship for a while. But I think what Gibson did far exceeds, because of his anti-Semitism and things like that, far exceeds anything that Downey Jr. did. And I don't think Gibson will ever end up back in A-listers status by any means, because I think he's still a very kind of troubled guy. But there are rumours that Lethal Weapon 5 might happen with Gibson in the director's chair. So you never know. Hollywood's a funny thing, isn't it? Because Hollywood's one of those things where they like a comeback story to Hollywood. Downey Jr. is testament to that. But whether Gibson deserves it or not, I don't think so.
No, I mean, I don't know. I'm not across the controversy as much as I maybe should be. He was in that Dragged Across Concrete, which
I thought was really good. Really good.
But maybe that's about right. That sort of
that level.
Like he's I don't know. I don't really.
He's clearly a talented actor. He's an incredibly talented director. Apocalypto proved that, which I know a lot of people rate Braveheart. I actually think Apocalypto is the one that
definitely. That's
it's a superb directing achievement. Anyway, listen, we digress. But listen, any final thoughts on Mad Max 2? Do you want to, you're considerably younger than me, so you're coming at this a different. You look it anyway. You must moisturize well.
I don't know. I feel like what I would say is this. I would when me and my wife went to see Fury Road at the cinema, and I was obviously a big fan of Mad Max. She had never seen any Mad Max films, and she absolutely loved it. Like, she didn't know what to expect. She came out with it. This is incredible. And I put on Mad Max 2 the other day, and then she was like, if I'd seen this before I went to see Mad Max Fury Road, I wouldn't have gone to see it. And I feel like it's not that. I mean, I don't share that opinion, obviously, because I love all of them. But it's like I can understand the sort of thinking of it. It's like it's very the whole look of like it's. I think the thing with it feels like the parodies of the look and everything have sort of seeped into the cultural atmosphere, like more than any of the actual things that pay it homage, like apart from like maybe Waterworld, like we said earlier. But like, so if it's sort of from that respect, watching it today, it feels like maybe a little bit like old hat. But so I love it. I think it's brilliant. I think it's like economic storytelling, which is I absolutely love. I think he's amazing. Mel Gibson is great in it, even if he doesn't say that much. Oh, we didn't talk about the dog. The dog is like
the dog. No, let's go for the dog, because it's funny, isn't it? Because there was always a thing about I work in advertising, and they say if you ever want an advert to be successful, put a dog in it. It's like it's funny because the dog is such a character in it, and when the dog gets killed, it's like
it's like, I mean, I know it's off camera and everything, but it's like you're like. Even every time I watch it, I'm like, they're not going to kill the dog. It's genuinely, it's like, I think it's up there as like my favorite like canine performances in films. Like, I think there's the dog, there's Bullseye in David Lean's Oliver Twist, who's brilliant, and there's the dog in The Thing, and then I think it's probably the dog in Mad Max. I'm like, this is great. And I love how the feral kid kind of replaces the dog. He's like, I've still got this little
pet, carries him around, holds him up like that. I think it's funny when after the crash, and he's basically got the kids under his arm, sort of thing. You're right. It does replace. I forgot. The dog. We've got to give credit to the dog, because the dog is such a personality in the film.
It's brilliant. I think, again, I'm just doing facts now, but I think it was I read somewhere that it was like it was from £1 and it was about to be like put down. It was like,
wow.
And like they're just like, we like this dog, we're gonna take this dog. And I think one of the crew members like adopted it afterwards or something.
Amazing.
It's like, it's such a, and like you get like, and it also it speaks to like him not being, him still having traces of humanity left. Like, he's got a dog, he's got something that he cares for. And I just love how Max is he is a sort of Western figure, like from spaghetti westerns, from like Anthony Mann or Bud Buttiker sort of westerns, where like he's not actually that good. Like in the situations he finds, he's at various points he's rescued or he's saved by the feral kid or the dog or the gyro captain, and it's like he's not like a hero. He's not heroic. I mean, he's heroic in his own way, but he's not like a traditional hero who sort of comes in and sorts everything out. It's absolutely he's that kind of
reluctant hero, isn't
Yeah.
it? And at the heart of him, the moral core is there, and he really does put himself through hell. You know, I always remember the bit that I really love towards the end is when he's got the core in his shoulder and he has to reach out to the kid, and it's like, and there's that thing, isn't there? There's the three screams. I think is it the kid screams first. Wes screams first, grabs the kid who screams, and then Max screams, and then you've got the crash. And there's that kind of those cinematic moments, and I think that's why, you know, for me, Mad Max 2 propelled itself above a lot of action movies. That almost a lot of scenes are very, very well thought through and choreographed like that, you know, and a lot of action scenes just kind of don't. It's funny, you know, I was watching License to Kill this afternoon before we kind of came on, and that, you know, that came out in 1989, and you look at the ponderous nature of how it's shot, you know, static camera pan, static camera, you know, and it's very functional. But you put that against, you know, it's almost like, why did they stick with John Glenn for so long when there were so many great directors out there? Actually, like George Miller, and, you know, well, look at, you know, what you had Lethal Weapon 2 come out in 1989, which was I think is the best of the lethal weapons. And I always think it's funny that they stuck with that when George Miller, you know, proved himself then to be a fantastic action director. And it's interesting because did your wife then, has she braved Thunderdome then? Has she watched Thunder? Has she not gone into that?
Well, to be fair, like I've not pushed for that.
You're not?
I'm not a big fan of Thunderdome. But but it's another thing where it's like, I feel like when you talk about Mad Max, if people are talking about Mad Max at all, they're talking, and then pre Fury Road, if you're talking about Mad Max, you're nearly always talking about the second one. Like, I really like the first one, but it's so like it's so far removed from the sort of look of the second one, and the third one I think just sort of tips a little bit too far.
It's kind of, what is it, Mad Max meets the Lost Boys, isn't it? It's kind of just
a little bit too campy for my liking, but like the second one is just like perfect.
I always think it's funny because obviously the third one was massively affected by the death of the producer when they were scouting location. So obviously George Miller just said he'd direct the action scenes, that's it. So, you know, I do wonder how, because of the sanitized nature of Mad Max 3, I do wonder how that, but, you know, by this point Warner Brothers had stuck loads of money behind it, so I do wonder whether it's more of a suits kind of driven film. You know, it's ticking boxes to sell toys almost, rather than anything else. Anyway, listen, look, it's been absolutely fabulous chatting to you about. I've got to say, you know, we must do this again sometime, and because since you said you know, the magic word for me, which is one of my other all-time favorite films, which is The Thing. I absolutely adore The Thing. So maybe in a couple of weeks, if you're up for doing this again, maybe we could talk The Thing.
100%. I could talk about The Thing like for hours.
All right, well, let's set it up. So thank you so much. Anything you want to say to just thank everybody for watching if they've got this far?
Thank you for watching. If you wanted to follow me on Twitter, while I'm still there, my username is @IMD Bartlett, where I just post all the stuff I write anyway.
Wicked. All right, well, what I'll do is I'll stick some links in the comments to your profile so people can follow you as well. Wicked. Thank you everybody for listening and watching if you got this far, and we'll hopefully catch you next time we'll catch Nick next time for The Thing. All right, cheers, thanks a lot.